They told her to move because those seats weren't meant for people like her. No questions, no apology, just two flight attendants towering over a black woman with a first-class boarding pass, and the kind of calm that makes people nervous. Passengers watched like it was normal, like watching someone get humiliated for their skin tone was just another form of in-flight entertainment. One whispered, "She probably slipped in by accident." Another pulled out their phone, grinning, "This is gonna blow up." But here's what no one knew. The woman they tried to erase didn't come to claim comfort. She came to measure who thought they owned it. And when the curtain finally lifts, it won't just reveal who she is. It'll reveal who they've always been. You think this is just another story about flying while black? Think again. This is a story about power. Hidden, quiet, waiting. And what happens when the very person they tried to humiliate turns out to own the ground they're standing on? So stay sharp, because every word matters. Every stare counts. And what they didn't see coming is about to reshape everything they thought they controlled. What moment shocks you the most so far? Which line made you sit up straighter? And where are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments, hit that subscribe button, and get ready, because this is only the beginning. Naomi Carter stepped onto Flight 309 with little more than a canvas backpack and a boarding pass that had started to crumple from the tight grip of her fingers. The gate agent hadn't looked her in the eye when waving her through, just gave the kind of half-smile people reserved for someone they assumed would be a flight attendant, or worse, lost. But Naomi didn't say a word. She was used to the quiet misunderstandings. She moved with the focused stillness of someone who had learned long ago that speaking too soon often meant being dismissed faster. The business class cabin had that synthetic scent of lemon-scrubbed leather and cold ambition. Men in navy blazers sipped espresso. Women in power heels tapped away at spreadsheets like they were defusing bombs. And then there was Naomi, 28, curly hair pulled into a low puff, worn hoodie, a thrifted coat, and jeans with one fraying hem. She wasn't trying to blend in. She just wasn't expecting to be noticed. But she was. The moment she turned into row 1, reaching for seat 1A, the air around her shifted like a collective eyebrow raising in unison. A man in 1B, late 50s, with thinning hair and a Rolex too tight on his wrist, smirked without lifting his gaze from the Wall Street Journal. "Sweetheart," he said, not bothering to look at her, "you must be lost. Coach is that way." Naomi paused, hand on the overhead bin, and for half a second she considered correcting him. Instead, she calmly lifted her backpack into the bin, sat down in 1A, and pulled out a dog-eared copy of Invisible Man. She didn't look at him once. The tension simmered quietly until it didn't. A few minutes later, the lead flight attendant, Tessa, appeared. Tall, slim, hair pulled back into the kind of bun that said "Control Freak" in 3 languages. She scanned the row and stopped at Naomi with a look that was all teeth and no warmth. "This seat is for premium flyers," she said, clipped and condescending. "Please don't make this difficult for us." Naomi blinked, then raised the boarding pass in her hand. "It's 1A, right?" she asked politely. Tessa didn't even look at it. She stared as if trying to x-ray through Naomi's skin. "I'll check with operations," she muttered, walking off before Naomi could say anything more. Naomi sighed. The hum of first class had always been quieter, not peaceful, but muted, the way noise was muted when it knew who was allowed to speak. She remembered her grandmother's words as a girl, "In rooms not built for you, silence is armor." So she wore it now. The murmurs started next. A woman across the aisle leaned toward her husband, whispering, "Do you think she used points or something?" He shrugged, chuckling. Another passenger down the row pulled out his phone and snapped a photo, pretending it was aimed at the window. Naomi saw the reflection in the glass. Her knuckles tightened around her book, but she didn't flinch. This wasn't new. Then came the louder voice from somewhere in 1D. "She's probably filming for some YouTube prank. Get likes by pretending to be rich." Classic. Laughter followed. Not the belly kind. More like hyenas circling prey, amused, sure of themselves. The pilot's voice broke through the intercom, asking for final boarding confirmation. Naomi let out a slow breath. The flight hadn't even taken off, and she was already exhausted. But she'd chosen this seat for a reason. She'd chosen this route. And if what she expected to happen did happen, then every single word, every smirk, every glare would be part of the data she needed. 10 minutes later, Tessa returned. She didn't apologize. She didn't acknowledge the boarding pass Naomi had been holding the entire time. Instead, she adjusted her scarf, leaned in slightly, and said in a tone soaked in false civility, "We've confirmed your seat. For now. But please stay put and don't wander during the flight. We don't want to alarm other passengers." Naomi gave her a slow nod. "Of course," she said softly, voice smooth as velvet over steel. As Tessa walked away, a young boy behind Naomi asked his mother, "Mom, is she famous or something?" The mother smiled awkwardly. "No, baby. She's probably just in the wrong place." Naomi smiled to herself. Wrong place? She was exactly where she needed to be. She leaned her head back against the leather and closed her eyes. She wasn't here for luxury. She wasn't here for comfort. She was here to observe something very specific. And so far, it was unfolding exactly as predicted. The cabin's mood shifted not because the tension dissolved, but because it was briefly buried beneath performance. Tessa returned with a different energy now, not softer in sincerity, but in pretense. Her body language lighter, her voice suddenly warm and animated, but only because two new passengers had stepped into row 1, a couple in their early 40s dressed in tailored travel gear and expensive cologne. Tessa flashed a smile like a switch had flipped and leaned in with the tone of someone spinning a story for an audience that wouldn't ask too many questions. "We're just helping this young lady find her proper section," she said cheerily, gesturing casually toward Naomi, as if she were a confused teenager in the wrong classroom. The woman gave a polite chuckle, and the man nodded, barely glancing Naomi's way, then turned to tuck his briefcase beneath the seat as if the matter were settled. Naomi didn't respond. She didn't blink. She simply looked back down at her book, knowing full well what Tessa had just done. It wasn't a correction. It was a performance designed to justify a narrative in front of witnesses. She had seen it before, the public script layered neatly over private contempt. Tessa wasn't speaking to Naomi. She was speaking about her in the third person, as if Naomi weren't perfectly fluent or perfectly aware of every word dripping from that smile. Across the aisle, a younger passenger wearing wireless headphones and designer sneakers pulled out his phone, angled it slightly, and took a photo. No flash, but Naomi noticed. He grinned as he turned to his friend in 1C. "This'll go viral," he whispered loud enough to be overheard, clearly wanting to be. Girl pretending to be rich on a flight. Classic. The friend laughed into his hand and leaned forward like this was part of the entertainment package. Naomi didn't react. She folded the corner of her page and closed the book slowly. The temperature in her chest didn't rise. This wasn't rage. This was data collection. The whispering didn't stop there. The woman from earlier leaned across the aisle again, this time to a new boarding passenger, shaking her head slightly with a thin smile. "Some mix-up with the seats apparently," she said, voice low but intentionally audible. "Happens more and more these days, doesn't it?" The other woman nodded, eyes darting toward Naomi for a split second, then returning to her designer tote like that glance had told her everything she needed to know. Tessa returned again, this time with a tray of pre-departure drinks, moving down the row like a model at a showroom event, smiling, nodding, placing flutes of champagne into manicured hands. When she reached 1B, she paused, flashed that same rehearsed smile, and said, "Still or sparkling, mister?" Hensley. He chose still. She moved to 1C, offered the same. But when she reached 1A, her hand didn't go to the tray. She didn't even look at Naomi. Instead, she adjusted the scarf at her collar and continued past her seat as if there were no one there. The silence left behind was heavier than any insult. Naomi counted the clicks of her heels as Tessa moved on. 3, 4, 5 steps, then the clink of glass on the far tray table. The man in 1B noticed. He looked from Naomi's empty armrest to Tessa, then back again. His lips parted like he might say something, but didn't. Of course he didn't. He shifted in his seat and lifted his glass instead, taking a long sip like swallowing the moment might erase it. Naomi exhaled quietly through her nose. Invisibility was a tactic, but when it was forced on you, it became a cage. And this cage had mood lighting and luxury snacks she wasn't being offered. A message buzzed on her phone, just a silent vibration in her jacket pocket, but she didn't check it. She already knew what it likely was, a ping from the monitoring app she had initiated before boarding, logging interactions, timestamps, proximity sensors. Every slight recorded, every exclusion noted. It wasn't just about the treatment. It was about proving that the treatment wasn't random. It was systematic, measurable. As boarding neared completion, Tessa made one last trip down the aisle, offering soft blankets and noise-canceling headphones from a sleek basket. Passengers cooed over the softness, thanked her with practiced politeness, and slid into the cocoon of first-class comfort. When she reached Naomi again, she stopped, not to offer, but to pause just long enough to register that she had paused. No eye contact, no basket. Then she turned away once more. The same man in 1B spoke this time. "Excuse me," he said to Tessa's back. She turned, smile already resetting. "She didn't get a drink or a blanket," he said, nodding toward Naomi. Tessa blinked, smile freezing for a fraction of a second before resuming. "Oh," she said lightly, "I wasn't sure she wanted any. We've had confusion with her reservation." Naomi finally spoke, her voice calm but clear. "There's no confusion. My reservation is 1A. Tessa gave a delicate tilt of her head. "Of course. I'll get you something shortly." She walked away again, the implication left floating. She's only getting service because someone else noticed. The plane began to taxi. The captain's voice came on, welcoming everyone, noting the weather in London, promising a smooth ride. Naomi stared out the window, face lit by the last trace of golden hour reflecting off the tarmac. Behind her, a passenger whispered again. She should have known better. Another voice responded, "Can't fake your way into this section forever." Naomi turned back, slowly. She didn't respond, not with words. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, worn notebook, flipping through pages marked with symbols and short annotations. She began writing not with urgency, but with the precision of someone tracking patterns. Every moment had its place. Every slight had context. And context, she knew, was power. Somewhere behind the curtain, the crew gathered to finalize manifest details. Tessa spoke in hushed tones to a junior attendant, gesturing briefly toward row 1. "She's causing discomfort," she whispered. "Keep an eye on her. If she starts filming or getting loud, we flag it. I don't want this turning into one of those viral disasters." The junior nodded, uncertain, but said nothing. Tessa continued, "This is first class. We can't have people thinking anyone can just walk in here." Back in her seat, Naomi folded the notebook, closed, and tucked it back into her jacket. The man in 1B glanced her way again. "Crazy world, huh?" he muttered, like a casual peace offering. Naomi met his eyes for the first time. "Not crazy," she replied. "Just predictable." The plane lifted from the ground, smooth and rising. And Naomi, arms folded, head back, prepared for what she already knew would come next. The seatbelt light had barely flicked off when Naomi felt 2 shadows loom over her shoulder, not the kind of polite presence cabin crew usually maintained, but something far more invasive, something territorial. She looked up from her folded hands to find 2 flight attendants standing so close their knees almost touched the seat in front of her. One was Tessa, again, her expression taut with forced calm. The other was a shorter, stockier attendant with a clipboard in one hand and a walkie in the other, eyes scanning Naomi like she was a misfiled form rather than a person. "MS. Carter," the man began, his tone formal but clipped. "We've had reports of a possible seat theft. We need to verify your boarding credentials immediately." Naomi's brows lifted, not in surprise but in calculation, measuring the wording. Report, possible theft, not confusion or clarification. She didn't reach for her phone or her boarding pass yet. Instead, she asked, voice even, "From who?" Tessa answered without hesitation, "We're not at liberty to disclose that. For now, we need you to step into the aisle so we can inspect your carry-on." Naomi didn't move. "You haven't checked the manifest," she said calmly. "My name is on that list." You didn't scan my boarding pass. You didn't validate anything. And now you're accusing me of stealing a seat in front of an entire cabin." Tessa stiffened, the veneer of professionalism slipping just enough to expose the disdain beneath. "We're not accusing. We're following protocol." But Naomi had already noted the contradiction. They hadn't done any of this with the man in 2A who boarded out of uniform or the teenager in row 3 who was allowed to sleep through takeoff without a seatbelt check. No one had been pulled up mid-flight and asked to justify their existence in a chair they'd legally paid for. Still seated, Naomi slowly reached down, unzipped the side of her bag, and offered it forward. "If you're going to search me," she said, "do it in full view. Let everyone see it." Her voice didn't rise, but the edge in her words made the row go silent. The stocky attendant reached in without a word, fingers pawing through her belongings like it was lost luggage on a conveyor belt. First came her book, then her phone charger, then a small velvet pouch of lip balm and earbuds. Then came the envelope, thick, matte ivory paper with a wax seal still unbroken, the kind banks used when handling high-security documentation. Naomi saw it the moment he touched it. So did Tessa. But instead of inspecting it carefully or handing it back with any sort of caution, he tossed it carelessly onto the tray table like it was a napkin. The wax seal cracked slightly on contact, but neither of them noticed or cared. A few items tumbled out next: her keys, a pen, a receipt folded into quarters. They hit the floor. Naomi didn't bend to retrieve them. Passengers nearby watched now, some feigning disinterest, others openly staring. The man in 1B cleared his throat, but said nothing. A woman in 2C leaned forward and whispered to her husband. She should have expected this, dressing like that in first. A murmur of agreement followed. Naomi's eyes never left the envelope on the tray. She saw it tilted just slightly, as if daring someone to touch it again. "You done?" she asked. The attendant looked at Tessa, who nodded stiffly. "For now." Naomi reached forward and, with deliberate precision, slid the envelope back into her bag, zipping it slowly as if sealing something sacred. "I'd like your names," she said. "Both of you. And I'd like you to document this. Fully. On record." Tessa's smile returned, brittle and stretched thin. "You're welcome to file a formal concern after the flight, Ms. Carter. But let's try to keep things peaceful, shall we?" The audacity of that line hung in the air like cheap perfume. Let's try to keep things peaceful. As if Naomi were the disturbance in this scenario. As if being searched publicly without cause was something people like her should endure quietly, with gratitude. Naomi sat back, head tilted slightly, eyes locked on Tessa's until the woman finally broke contact and stepped away, heels clicking faster now. Minutes later, the drink cart returned, but once again skipped over 1A. Naomi didn't ask. She didn't move. She simply tapped a single word into her phone's secure app, flagged. The back-end system connected to her identity authorization protocols would now begin logging everything. The time of search, the cabin crew's proximity, the lack of manifest confirmation. No one else in that cabin knew what was being recorded. That was the point. The silence around her wasn't awkward, it was dense. Thick. The kind of silence that grew when a crowd was complicit, when they weren't sure if what they'd witnessed was wrong, or just uncomfortable. The kind that let cruelty root itself in procedure. A few rows back, a young couple whispered behind a raised magazine. "Do you think she'll sue?" one of them asked. The other shook their head. People like her never win those cases. No one believes them anyway. Naomi heard every word. She didn't flinch. She knew the landscape better than they did. The fight wasn't in the courtroom. It was in the data. Somewhere mid-cabin, the junior flight attendant, maybe in her 20s, fresh-faced, still smiling like the job hadn't burned through her yet, passed Naomi and paused. She glanced down at the bag, now zipped tight, then back at Naomi's face. Her expression faltered for a moment, as if she wanted to say something, maybe apologize, maybe excuse herself from the actions of her coworkers. But then her training kicked in. She offered a silent nod and moved on. Naomi watched her go. Too green to speak. Too smart to stay silent. Outside the window, The sky had turned the color of cold steel, clouds clustering along the edge of the horizon like something brewing. Naomi adjusted the hood of her sweatshirt, leaned slightly into the headrest, and pressed her fingers gently to her temple. Her heart didn't race. Her mind didn't spiral. This wasn't panic. This was validation. A few minutes later, Tessa returned with a clipboard and a new smile, the kind worn for PR photos and written apologies. "Just following up," she said brightly, "on our earlier misunderstanding. We've confirmed your name on the manifest. There must have been a sync error in the system earlier." Naomi didn't answer. Tessa hesitated, then added, "We appreciate your patience." But Naomi knew that tone too. It wasn't gratitude. It was preemptive damage control. She stared through her, then said quietly, "You handled a suspicion like a certainty. That's not a sync error. That's a choice." Tessa's jaw flexed ever so slightly before she stepped back again, face now unreadable. Naomi returned her gaze to the window. Clouds split and joined like seams across a sky too quiet for the storm it was holding. The cabin had quieted again, not in a way that meant peace, but in the way that suggested everyone was waiting for the next flare-up, the next spectacle. As if the entire front section of Flight 309 had turned into an upscale theater, and Naomi was the unwilling star of a performance she never auditioned for. She had gone still in her seat after the search, hands folded atop her tray table. The envelope returned to her bag, her posture straight but not stiff. It was the stillness of someone resisting both retreat and retaliation, the stillness of someone who'd lived long enough to know that responding to humiliation with fury only made her the villain in other people's stories. But even silence wasn't safe. From the corner of her ear, Naomi caught the soft click of a flight attendant's walkie crackling to life, the kind of static-laced whisper that usually stayed just below a passenger's awareness. Only this time, the volume was a touch too high, or perhaps the speaker's carelessness had overridden caution. Through the slight hissing feedback of the channel, a female voice, likely Tessa, spoke in a low murmur meant to pass through unnoticed. She probably saved up all year to sit here and still got the wrong seat. Typical. The words slithered into the cabin air like smoke, invisible to most, but Naomi heard them with perfect clarity. Her headphones had slipped slightly, one side resting just loosely enough to allow outside noise to bleed in. The timing was cruelly poetic. She didn't react, not with a glance, not a breath. Instead, her eyes remained on the back of the seat in front of her, unmoving, as if focusing her entire being on something that wouldn't fall apart. But her jaw tightened, just once. Then she swallowed the tension back into her spine and steadied her breath. Across the aisle, the woman in 2C let out a sharp laugh, sudden and misplaced. It wasn't a reaction to a joke or a movie, just the kind of performative snort that demanded attention. Naomi didn't turn. She knew better. The power was never in looking. It was in refusing to give them what they were trying to provoke. Then came the kick. Not hard enough to jolt her forward, but just sharp enough to register. The tip of someone's foot thudding against the lower back of her seat with that passive-aggressive rhythm people use when pretending it was an accident. Naomi sat still. A second later, the man seated behind her leaned forward just enough for his voice to hover over her shoulder. He didn't whisper. He didn't even lower his tone. "Try not to bring your neighborhood drama up here," he said, casual as if commenting on the weather, dismissive as if she were part of some tabloid headline he didn't subscribe to. Naomi blinked once, a slow drag of her eyelids. Her grip around the edge of her tray tightened slightly, the only visible response. She didn't flinch. She didn't rise. She had rehearsed this moment too many times in too many forms. If she turned around, it would be labeled a confrontation. If she spoke up, it would be agitation. If she moved, it would be escalation. So instead, she leaned back just enough to reclaim her space and close her eyes. Behind her, the man chuckled. "Yeah, that's what I thought," he muttered to whoever sat beside him. "No comeback now, huh?" A muffled laugh answered. A fist bump. Maybe. Naomi didn't care to look. Up ahead, Tessa was in the galley, pretending to check inventory, but really just watching the feed from the forward-facing cabin cam mounted near the exit row. She sipped from a paper cup and muttered to the junior attendant beside her. Passengers like that always want a story. If she records something and tries to twist it online, let me handle it. PR loves a victim narrative. The younger attendant said nothing, just nodded, unsure whether to agree or run. At row 1, Naomi opened her eyes slowly. She reached down and pulled her phone from the seat pocket, not to film, not to post, but to document. In the secure apps log, she marked 2 more entries: cabin staff, verbal dehumanization, private channel overheard, and rear passenger, physical provocation and coded racial slur. She time-stamped both and set them to auto-sync. The app encrypted everything into a private cloud monitored only by the regulatory oversight team embedded in her trust authority's legal division. A red dot on her screen pulsed softly. Every entry would now trigger a pattern alert. Beside her, the man in 1B shifted again, clearly uncomfortable but still silent. He had watched it all. The search, the skipped service, the whispered insult, the kick, and still his lips had stayed closed. Naomi wasn't angry with him. She had long since stopped expecting courage from bystanders. She expected self-preservation, and she was rarely disappointed. She tapped once more into the app, opening a secondary function labeled Audit Flag. Beneath it were toggles for incidents: behavioral misreporting, class-based discrimination, racial targeting. She selected all 3. A prompt blinked. Confirm flag for live incident review. She pressed yes. In the galley, the tablet mounted near the crew manifest lit up red. A silent warning pulsed. It wasn't loud. It didn't flash. But Tessa saw it. She leaned closer, frowning. Flagged, she muttered. From where? The junior attendant shrugged, glanced at the screen, then said, row 1. Tessa stared at it, then locked the tablet with a swipe, mumbling under her breath. She knows how to push buttons. Fine. Let's see how far she thinks that'll get her. The aircraft began to hit light turbulence. The seatbelt sign chimed. Naomi fastened her belt again, even though she'd never unbuckled it. She closed her eyes a second time, not to sleep, but to collect. She knew this part of the pattern. When microaggressions failed to spark reaction, the aggressors moved to public framing. She's unstable. She's difficult. She's a threat. She wouldn't give them the fuel. The turbulence increased, subtle bumps like reminders that the sky didn't care about class, race, or rank. It moved as it pleased. And somewhere beyond that sky, a system watched. Not the airlines. Hers. The cabin had settled into a quiet lull again after the turbulence, but for Naomi, there was no such thing as calm. Not here, not anymore. Every breath she took felt like a strategic choice, every blink like a shield lowered too soon. She stayed upright, alert, though her posture remained casual. It was a survival instinct more than a comfort. She had learned long ago that stillness was the best camouflage when the room was stacked against you. The audit flag had already been triggered and logged, but she knew the system worked quietly, methodically. It wasn't designed to confront in real time. It was designed to catch what people thought they could hide. And right now, someone was about to test just how invisible justice could be. From the galley, Tessa re-emerged, walking briskly down the aisle with a new expression. Not the plastic smile she'd used before, but something more calculated. She nodded at the junior attendant behind her, whose face was pale, eyes wide, jaw tight. Naomi noticed it immediately. The younger woman was holding something small and white in her palm, barely noticeable. Just a tube, maybe 2 inches long. Lotion? Sanitizer? No, Naomi recognized the shape. It looked like one of those travel-size cosmetics, the kind handed out in airport lounges or tossed into toiletry kits. But this one didn't belong to Naomi. She had packed her bag herself, meticulously, and had every item scanned at security. And still, when the junior attendant reached Naomi's row, her hand twitched downward near the side of Naomi's seat. Subtle, but not subtle enough. Naomi's eyes locked on the movement, caught the glint of the cap, the drop of the wrist. The second it left the attendant's hand and slipped beneath the cushion. It was quiet, practiced, but not perfect. A fraction too late, a passenger across the aisle turned and looked. Naomi saw the woman's gaze flick down, then back up to Naomi's face. No words were spoken. Not yet. "Excuse me, Ms. Carter," Tessa began, her voice now full of feigned concern and bureaucratic patience. "We've been alerted to a potential safety issue involving an unregistered item under your seat." Naomi didn't respond right away. She tilted her head slightly, narrowing her eyes just enough to say, "I saw what you did." "Unregistered?" she repeated. "According to whom?" Tessa gave a polite shrug. "Our in-flight system flagged irregular packaging. We're required to verify that all items within passenger access are compliant with FAA standards." Naomi's stare hardened. "So now you're telling me my seat is being investigated for a suspicious object?" Tessa gave a thin smile. "It's just a precaution. If you wouldn't mind standing so we can complete the inspection." Her tone had already shifted to command, carefully veiled behind customer service language. But the implication was unmistakable. "Stand up so we can search you again, this time with the whole cabin watching." Around her, conversations paused. Heads turned. Devices lowered. Naomi could feel the shift in the air. The collective inhale of an audience watching something they instinctively knew wasn't right, but not knowing how or whether to stop it. The man in 1B pretended to adjust his watch, stealing a sideways glance. The woman in 2C openly stared now, her expression unreadable. The passenger from row 3, the same one who had laughed at the idea of neighborhood drama, now leaned into the aisle, watching. Naomi didn't move immediately. She looked at Tessa, then at the junior attendant, whose eyes darted anywhere but toward Naomi's. Then Naomi slowly unbuckled her seatbelt and stood, hands calmly at her sides. "Go ahead," she said. "Let's put on the show." The younger attendant crouched quickly, pretending to check the floor, and within seconds emerged with the white tube held high like evidence in a courtroom. "Here it is," she said quietly, handing it to Tessa. Tessa examined it briefly, then held it up. "This appears to be an unlabeled cosmetic item," she said. "Ms. Carter, do you recognize this?" Naomi tilted her head. "I do now," she replied coolly. "It was just planted under my seat. I watched it happen." A ripple moved through the cabin. It wasn't outrage, not yet. It was that awkward, shifting energy of people suddenly aware they were witnessing something unethical, but unsure how to process it. One person gasped. Another muttered, "Wait, what did she say?" But Naomi wasn't finished. She turned, now addressing the passengers directly. "I've been searched once already, without cause. I've had my personal belongings spilled onto the floor. I've been ignored, insulted. And now I'm being accused of hiding a tube of lotion that wasn't in my possession 2 minutes ago." Tessa raised a hand. "Ma'am, we're trying to maintain safety protocol here." "No," Naomi cut in, her voice low but direct. "You're trying to build a paper trail. You're trying to create enough concerns so you can justify removing me from this cabin or this flight." She turned back to the junior attendant. "You dropped that. I saw you." So did the woman across the aisle. The woman in question froze, caught between complicity and truth. Her eyes widened slightly, but she said nothing. Not yet. Naomi stepped back into her seat, slow and deliberate, not breaking eye contact with Tessa. "So what now?" she asked. "Do you want to call security midair? Do you want to file a report that says black woman in 1A possibly carrying dangerous skincare? Is that the story you're going with?" Tessa's mouth opened, but no words came. Her fingers tightened slightly around the tube. Naomi leaned forward just enough to lower her voice. "This isn't about lotion. This is about presence. You don't like who I am and where I'm sitting. So you're trying to rewrite reality until I fit your assumptions. But I'm not moving." Silence followed. Heavy. No turbulence outside, but inside, plenty. In the galley, the compliance tablet pinged again. Another silent flag. This one coded red. Possible item planting behavior detected, flight crew proximity, conflict logged, visual anomaly match from seat 1A audit sensor. The system had seen it too. Naomi remained seated, her back against the firm leather of 1A. The silence around her now no longer just heavy. It was electric, humming with a kind of suppressed tension that made every breath feel like an act of resistance. The white tube was gone, taken back to the galley by Tessa without another word. But the damage had been logged, not just in Naomi's system, but in the wary glances that continued to flick toward her, unsure whether she was the villain in a drama or the victim of something far more insidious. She looked straight ahead, unmoved. But she knew what came next. It was never enough to isolate someone. You had to invalidate them. And that meant silencing their voice before anyone might actually start to listen. She waited until Tessa passed her row again, then spoke clearly and calmly, without raising her tone. "I'd like to speak with the flight supervisor," Naomi said. "Not cabin crew. Flight supervisor." Immediately, Tessa paused in her step, her posture still, her eyes narrowing with performative patience. She tilted her head slightly, then replied in a voice that was just loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear. "You don't have to make demand here," she said, smiling tightly, as if Naomi had just ordered filet mignon on a peanut budget. "You're a passenger, not personnel. Please stay in your seat and refrain from further disruption." The word disruption echoed in Naomi's ears like a verdict, not a description, a label, a warning sign being planted just as subtly as that lotion tube. Only this time, in the minds of everyone watching, she wasn't angry. She was methodical. Her fingers tapped silently against the side of her thigh beneath the tray table, counting seconds, syncing time stamps in her head. "Refusal to connect passenger with flight supervisor," she muttered under her breath, logging the phrase into her secure device without looking. Tone condescending. Witness count 5 within hearing range. Then the voice came from further down the aisle. A male attendant, early 30s, hair slicked back too tight and grin just a little too proud, stepped toward the front with a smirk painted across his lips. "Hey," he said loud enough to cut through the cabin. "If you're filming for TikTok, I'd suggest a better outfit next time. Lighting's brutal in this row." A couple of passengers laughed. One even clapped softly, like he was watching stand-up. Naomi didn't flinch. Her eyes stayed on him, and her silence worked like a mirror, reflecting every ounce of their audacity back at them. The attendant didn't stop. "Come on," he added, chuckling. "You're not even subtle. First the lotion stunt. Now asking for a supervisor? You're looking for your moment, right?" His voice carried a tone that mixed mockery with certainty. Certainty that no one would challenge him. Certainty that the uniform he wore gave him immunity from consequences. Naomi inhaled slowly through her nose. Not in defeat. In calibration. She was calculating response vectors, not emotions. Anger wouldn't serve her. But silence? That still had power, especially when wielded with precision. Behind her, someone whispered, "What's her problem?" Another replied, "Entitlement, maybe? She probably just wants the free voucher or whatever people milk out of this kind of drama." Naomi shifted her shoulders, keeping her head high. She had no interest in correcting strangers' delusions. She wasn't here for sympathy. She was here to prove a point, one measured in patterns, not apologies. Tessa leaned in again, voice sugary, toxic, and public. "MS. Carter, we're trying very hard to make this flight comfortable for everyone. If you feel the need to escalate matters, we'll have to document it accordingly." Naomi responded without emotion. "Document everything," she said. "Start with the verbal harassment from your staff, the physical search without cause, the planted item under my seat, and the refusal to acknowledge my request for supervisory oversight." Tessa's smile didn't falter, but the gleam in her eyes dulled slightly. This wasn't going the way she'd scripted it. The man in 1B finally spoke, not looking at Naomi, but addressing no one in particular. "Can't we just fly in peace? All of this over a lotion bottle." His tone suggested he thought he was the voice of reason, the adult in the room. Naomi looked at him once, not long enough to engage, just long enough to let him know she heard the cowardice in his voice masked as neutrality. The male attendant returned to the galley, laughing quietly to himself. Naomi watched the back of his head disappear behind the curtain. The audit app in her hand blinked green once, then red. A new entry had logged. Crew verbal harassment, multiple witnesses, recorded proximity, and audio spike. The system had captured everything. She didn't need to speak for it. The system had its own ears now. At the rear of first class, the junior attendant from earlier stood motionless, hands clasped in front of her stomach, clearly unsure whether to intervene or keep her head down. Naomi noticed her discomfort. She didn't hold it against her. Not yet. The silence of the young wasn't always complicity. It was often survival in uniform. Tessa passed again, this time holding a service sheet. She glanced at Naomi and then made a show of marking something on the paper. Naomi didn't need to see it to know what it was. A behavioral note. Code speak for problem passenger. That was how it started. First a whisper, then a checkbox, and soon enough, a flag on your name that followed you from airport to airport like a ghost in the terminal. The captain hadn't said a word. No one had. Naomi glanced toward the cockpit door, wondering how many times in his career he'd flown passengers like her, black, silent, watching, but never once considered what their silence cost them. A second audit ping blinked on her screen. Behavioral flag, assigned seat, a no verbal trigger detected. The system had caught the contradiction. She hadn't done anything, but they'd flagged her anyway. Naomi pressed a second button inside the app, one rarely used. Escalation hold tier 2, alert pre-trigger review requested. That would notify her private oversight team to begin preparing an incident brief. It wouldn't activate enforcement. Not yet. But it was a fuse, and the match had been struck. The voice of the male attendant came back through the galley curtain one last time, muttering to someone in a mocking whisper. Maybe she thinks she's Rosa Parks, sitting up here like she's owed something. Naomi heard it. So did row 2. No one laughed this time. Outside the window, the sun dipped lower, casting the wing in shadow. The hum of the engine felt like it slowed, though Naomi knew it hadn't. Her breath came steady, deliberate. Her voice had been denied, her request rejected, her presence mocked, but her system was still recording. The hum of the cabin persisted like a low-frequency growl, indifferent to the turmoil brewing in 1A, where Naomi sat steady, spine aligned with the backrest, heart rate controlled, but mind blazing with calculation. The insult from the male attendant still hung in the air like a thin film of smoke, and no one had dared to speak since. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was fear, confusion, anticipation. Naomi reached slowly into the inner lining of her jacket, fingers brushing past the edge of the notebook she'd used earlier, and instead retrieved a matte black phone, slimmer and denser than a consumer device, cold to the touch. She unlocked it with a fingerprint, a scan that wasn't just for access, but for identity confirmation, cross-verified with her embedded trustee credentials. The screen lit up with a quiet pulse of green and blue, and then the app appeared, vigilant. CAA Trustee Network. It didn't advertise itself. It didn't scream authority. But its mere presence signaled that this phone did not belong to just another passenger. Naomi tapped the center icon, held her thumb to the biometric lock again, and when prompted, selected a command hidden 3 tiers beneath standard functions. The prompt was sterile, mechanical, final. Activate sector audit emergency authorization. Below it, a secondary prompt blinked. Trigger anonymous oversight protocol, AOP. Escalation level 2? Naomi didn't hesitate. She tapped yes. Then, without looking up, she placed the phone face down on her tray table. The light on its corner pulsed once, then went dark. 3 rows behind her. The same male attendant chuckled again, unaware that the next few minutes would alter more than just a shift. In the cockpit, a low buzz echoed through the captain's panel. Not a cabin notification, not turbulence alert, but a system-level signal rerouted through an encrypted channel reserved only for high-priority oversight clients. The first officer looked over, confused. "Did you just get a trustee ping?" he asked. The captain frowned, leaned forward, and tapped a series of manual overrides. A black bar appeared across the top of their navigation system, flashing a 4-digit code neither of them had seen in months. CAA Watch, OPR audit engaged. The system didn't ask permission. It didn't need to. It was designed to execute. Back in the cabin, nothing changed on the surface. Naomi remained still, unmoved, a woman who had, in the eyes of the crew, just been humiliated, ignored, silenced. She looked like someone who had been beaten down by the weight of institutional arrogance. And that was the beauty of the miscalculation. They had assumed silence meant submission. What they didn't know was that silence had been her most valuable ally. Because in silence, no one noticed her fingers tapping again, this time unlocking the audit tracking interface tied to the financial board of the Civil Aviation Authority's Special Trust. Her name, Naomi Elise Carter, flashed briefly alongside a string of verification codes, Trustee Class, Tier 1A. Below that, her organizational affiliation glowed in soft gray. CAA Oversight Board Emergency Compliance Division. Tessa, still oblivious, passed by again, speaking softly into her mic. Still no movement from 1A. We might be clear. Naomi heard it. So did the app. The mic signal had been intercepted. The audit AI already translating verbal logs into pattern violations. Passive neglect. Verbal coercion. Denial of supervisory access. Planted material. Naomi didn't need to say another word. Her system was now speaking for her, directly to the regulatory authorities who didn't wait for press releases or union approvals to act. At exactly 7:43 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, the data feed in the cockpit updated again. This time it wasn't subtle. A secondary terminal in the cabin's control panel flickered on, then locked itself with a red border that read, Live Oversight Engaged, Do Not Override, Level 2 Visibility Active. The captain looked at his co-pilot. Who the hell is in 1A, he asked. The co-pilot checked the passenger manifest, then rechecked it. Naomi Carter, he said slowly. No flag notes, no upgrades, just booked outright. The captain's hand hovered above the internal channel mic. That name's familiar, he muttered. Wait, Carter? Is she? He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Because 30,000 feet below, at an operations center in Dulles, a compliance officer's monitor had just blinked awake with an urgent incoming transmission from Flight 309. The top of the message read, Active Stakeholder, Alert Oversight Compliance Breach Possible. A second later, a phone rang at the office of the Executive Director of CAA Watch. A third alert sent an encrypted email to the private equity firm controlling 17% of the airline's board seats. Naomi's activation wasn't a request for help. It was a notification of observation. And that meant one thing. Everyone on the plane was now being watched. Still seated, Naomi tapped her device once more, pulling up the live manifest. It had already updated. Every interaction she'd logged over the past 2 hours had been layered with video syncs, voice logs, and location pings. Beside each name, Tessa, the male attendant, the junior crew member, sat compliance scores, behavior flags, and breach markers. The system was doing exactly what it had been built to do. Catch the people who thought policy could protect prejudice. Across the aisle, a woman whispered, Why is she still so calm? Her seatmate shrugged. Maybe she's used to it. Naomi heard them. She didn't care. She wasn't just used to it, she had prepared for it. This flight, this seat, this airline, all of it had been deliberate. She had taken this route for one reason, to conduct a blind audit. No warning, no press, no titles. Just her, in full anonymity, watching how people behaved when they believed no one important was watching. And they had failed. Spectacularly. The male attendant returned to the galley, still unaware, still laughing about the TikTok lawyer in 1A. But the galley screen behind him had changed. The device they used to log service requests, reset cabin controls, and submit reports now displayed a full-screen notification. System Alert Audit Protocol Engaged, Do Not Alter Manifest, Do Not Modify Records, All Actions Logged. He stared at it, confused. Then tapped the screen. It didn't respond. The message stayed frozen. In her seat, Naomi turned her phone face down again. She no longer needed to monitor it actively. The system would take it from here. And soon, so would the consequences. The phone rested on Naomi's tray table like an undetonated charge. Black glass screen gone dark but not dormant, still connected to a back-end network that had already pulled every interaction, every glance, every whispered insult into permanent record. But the truth was, the audit protocol wasn't her only weapon. It was the warm-up, the true detonator, The thing no one on board Flight 309 had anticipated was sitting in her contacts list, behind 2 layers of biometric verification and a final confirmation code tied directly to the Civil Trust's primary financial ledger. Naomi had kept her calm through planted evidence, public humiliation, and verbal degradation because she'd been trained for this moment, not by corporate PR or legal seminars, but by lived experience weaponized through preparation. She picked up the phone again, not quickly, not in anger, but with the deliberate clarity of someone flipping a chessboard over, not because they lost, but because they'd already won. The call connected in 2 rings. No menu, no hold music, just a direct line to the office of Hayden Wilkes, the Chief Financial Officer of Concord Aviation Group, the holding entity behind the airline operating Flight 309. Naomi didn't speak when his assistant picked up. She didn't have to. The line transferred instantly. Wilkes answered himself, his voice already alert. "Naomi," he said, confusion laced in concern. She didn't bother with pleasantries. Her voice was steel. She referred to me as that girl. "I need oversight protocol activated. Full compliance, visibility. Immediate." There was a pause. Not hesitation, shock. "Say no more," Wilkes replied. "It's happening." She ended the call. At that exact moment, the overhead panel in the galley screen flickered violently before cutting to black, then returned with a pulsing crimson border. It was followed by a single alert that scrolled across every active interface in the plane's internal crew systems. Cockpit, cabin, manifest, service screens, even the overhead seat map. The text was simple, unembellished, and absolutely devastating. Cabin violation detected, passenger Naomi Carter, protected class. Tier Alpha oversight protocol engaged, record lockdown immediate. Below it, a second line blinked. Suspend staff intervention, compliance monitoring in progress. Tessa, midway through logging an entry against Naomi into the crew journal, froze. Her stylus hovered above the screen like a blade midair, and for the first time in the flight, her confident posture faltered. The male attendant, who had just stepped out of the galley laughing at some joke about passengers who tried too hard to matter, now stood facing the glowing red alert as if it were a firing squad. The screen continued flashing, and with it, the system locked them all out. The interface went read-only, every button grayed out, every passenger log froze in place, time-stamped and sent to a server none of them could access or delete. In row 1A, Naomi remained still, her phone face down again, eyes closed. She didn't need to witness the impact to know it was happening. She could feel it in the shift of body language, 3 rows in every direction, the subtle retraction of shoulders, the quick turning of heads, the quiet realization that the woman who'd been mocked, searched, and sidelined was not just somebody. She was the wrong person to test. Tessa tapped her earpiece. "Flight deck, are you seeing this?" she whispered, her voice now thin, uncertain. The co-pilot responded calmly, confirmed. Signal came from Concord Group. "We're on restricted interaction until further directive." "Restricted?" Tessa asked, her tone cracking slightly. "What does that even mean?" The captain's voice broke and then firmer. "It means you don't speak to her. You don't approach her. And if you've made any unsanctioned entries into the manifest, delete nothing. Legal Review is live streaming this." Naomi opened her eyes. The male attendant passed by the front row again, slower this time. No jokes, no smirks. He glanced at her, and for the first time all flight, there was something new in his eyes, not irritation, not superiority, but fear. She didn't look away. She let him sit in the discomfort he'd authored. He moved past without a word. In the main cabin, the junior attendant who had dropped the tube earlier now stood pale-faced near the rear service area, frozen in front of a screen that showed her own name blinking beneath the phrase, "Actions under Review Protocol 12.7 video sync active." She had been a pawn in this, but pawns still bore consequence. She looked back toward the front, toward Naomi, and her mouth opened as if to apologize. Naomi met her gaze, then turned away. An alert quietly appeared on Naomi's secondary interface. It read, "Executive Board ping received, stakeholder identity confirmed, 3 board members notified, audit escalation level pending." Her presence was no longer anonymous. That layer had been lifted. Her class, previously shielded from staff by trusty design, was now fully revealed. Tier Alpha, the highest possible clearance assigned to any private individual in the Oversight Division. The classification wasn't just administrative, it was operational. It meant that any interaction involving her carried legal risk, regulatory consequence, and potentially financial liability for the carrier. It meant she wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was a living audit report. And they had failed her. Publicly, the whispers began again, but not the way they had before. This time, they weren't snide. They were tentative. "Did you see that alert?" One man whispered to his partner. "Tier Alpha? That's CA level." The partner responded, "Is she government?" Another chimed in, "No. Worse. She's money." A few rows back, a passenger who had earlier chuckled at the idea of Naomi being out of place now opened his tablet and began searching her name, only to find nothing. No LinkedIn, no public Instagram, just an archived mention in a 2-year-old SEC bulletin under a redacted funding code tied to infrastructure reallocation. Naomi's screen blinked again. Primary authority verified 98% complete manifest audit. The final 2% would come shortly, as data synced from backup satellite streams, pulling voice logs and crew camera footage into redundancy capture. They couldn't erase what had been done. The system wouldn't allow it. And Naomi wasn't there to forgive. She was there to finish. The wheels of Flight 309 met the tarmac with a softened screech, the cabin shuddering slightly as the aircraft decelerated. But the usual wave of relief that followed touchdown never arrived. Not for the crew. Not after what had unfolded at 37,000 feet. The passengers sat upright, eyes forward, their movements mechanical, subdued by the air of consequence that now thickened around them like fog. Naomi Carter remained still in seat 1A, unbothered, hands resting atop the same phone that had changed the direction of the entire flight, her expression unreadable. The cockpit door opened before the final chime could release passengers, and from it emerged the captain himself, not with a customary farewell smile, but with a look carved from obligation and dread. He didn't address the cabin. He didn't need to, because just outside the forward exit, a new figure had appeared. One not clad in airline uniform or TSA black, but in a dark tailored suit, navy tie, and a polished metal badge clipped discreetly near the hip. Tessa's eyes widened the moment she saw him. So did the eyes of the male attendant and the junior crew member, who now stood frozen halfway between galley and service cart, gripping metal trays with stiff fingers. The man didn't wait for the passengers to deboard. Instead, he stepped directly into the cabin, glancing only once toward Naomi, giving a subtle nod of acknowledgement, then turned his full attention to the crew. "Tessa Monroe, Jackson Pierce, Layla Grange," he said calmly, voice firm and level. "You are required to exit the cabin immediately. Bring your personal devices. Leave all flight records as is. This is not optional." Tessa tried to recover her composure, smoothing her scarf with trembling fingers. "May I ask why?" "You may not," the man cut in, pulling a slim black folder from his coat pocket. He opened it just enough for the airline logo and the executive seal of Concorde's Ethics and Regulatory Board to gleam in the overhead light. "Your license badge has been revoked pending ethics tribunal," he continued. "You are under direct executive review. You'll be escorted to a holding room at Terminal B for immediate debriefing." Gasps rustled through the front rows. A man in 2C leaned forward. "Wait, they're removing the flight crew?" Another whispered, "Didn't she activate some oversight thing?" "I thought she was a compliance plant," someone else added. But none of them had the full picture. Not yet. Not even close. Tessa's breath hitched. Jackson, the male attendant, glanced around in disbelief, then at Naomi, the realization settling in his gut like cold lead. She set us up," he muttered under his breath. The suited man heard it. "No," he replied smoothly. "You set yourselves up. She just made sure someone was watching." Behind him, another uniformed figure appeared in the doorway, this one holding a slim tablet and wearing a communications earpiece. She tapped once on the screen, then nodded. The internal notice just hit the system. It's official. At precisely 9:06 p.m. Eastern Time, every staff member tied to Flight 309 received the same internal bulletin, routed through the airline's compliance messaging platform and tagged under Tier 1 advisory. The headline was stark: Flight 309 under executive review. All service personnel temporarily suspended for racial profiling during active compliance audit. Below it, a brief paragraph confirmed the nature of the violation: unauthorized behavior modifications, verbal misconduct, class discrimination patterns, and potential evidence tampering. Until full ethics board review is complete, involved personnel are prohibited from all active duty assignments. The reaction was immediate. Crew devices locked, login access suspended, uniform credentials auto-flagged. Tessa's badge let out a shrill tone as the embedded RFID chip deactivated mid-transmission. She tried to scan into the control panel one last time, but the screen lit red. Access denied, badge revoked, contact admin. Her mouth moved as if to protest, but no sound came out. Passengers began to rise, slowly, cautiously. Some cast glances toward Naomi, unsure of whether to thank her, fear her, or simply understand what they had just witnessed. One man in business attire muttered, "I knew something was off when they searched her like that." Another whispered to his seatmate, "This is why you treat people right. You never know who's holding the keys." Naomi said nothing. She stood, adjusted her jacket, retrieved her bag, and checked the envelope inside, untouched. Its seal remained pristine, but its meaning had been fully unleashed. The junior attendant, Layla, now visibly trembling, stepped forward hesitantly. "Ma'am, I didn't mean..." But the suited man interrupted her. "Save it for the tribunal." Layla stepped back, tears welling in her eyes, the full weight of her choices or silence now collapsing on her shoulders. As they were ushered off the plane through a separate corridor, whispers followed them like shadows. The crew that had once walked the aisle with superiority now exited with shame carved into every step. In the operations center miles away, a red light blinked on the compliance board screen. A senior administrator checked the incident log, nodded to herself, and initiated the secondary protocol. Personnel review queue status active. Tribunal committee assembled, 3-member panel notified. Downstairs in the legal division, a paralegal printed the first batch of transcripts from the synced audio logs. On page 4, bolded and highlighted, was the line, "You don't get to make demands here." Meanwhile, back on the aircraft, the remaining crew stood in silence. No one moved to offer drinks. No one spoke to Naomi. She had shifted the balance of power not by screaming, not by pleading, but by pulling back the curtain they thought would always protect them. A few rows back, the woman who had earlier whispered about neighborhood drama now avoided Naomi's gaze altogether. Naomi didn't look at her either. The captain returned briefly from the cockpit, stepped toward Naomi, and spoke quietly, respectfully. "Is there anything you need from us before disembarkation?" Naomi studied him, then shook her head. "No, but I'll be needing a record of every manifest interaction, time-stamped. You'll find the retrieval code already uploaded." He blinked, caught off guard by her precision, then nodded. "Understood." Outside the window, dusk had deepened. The tarmac lights flickered on, painting streaks of gold across the wet runway. A private transport van idled near the terminal entrance, its driver already scanning for a Tier Alpha clearance code. Naomi walked toward the exit slowly, the aisle now parting before her, not from fear, but from recognition. She had been underestimated, dismissed, scrutinized, and silenced. But now, the silence belonged to them. The aircraft door opened with a mechanical sigh, but Naomi Carter didn't move immediately. She waited until the suited compliance officer finished speaking with ground security, then nodded once as he gestured toward a separate staircase leading down from the forward exit, away from the jet bridge, away from the crowd, and more importantly, away from the spectacle. This was not a moment for cameras or fanfare. She had not come to be vindicated publicly. She had come to test a system, and the results spoke louder than any press conference ever could. With her canvas bag slung across one shoulder and the still-sealed envelope tucked inside, Naomi stepped through the open hatch and into the fading light of early evening. The tarmac smelled of rubber and heat, the echo of jet engines pulsing somewhere in the distance. A black sedan waited at the edge of the access road, engine running, windows tinted, no logos, no identifiers. She approached without hesitation. The driver opened the door, but before she could step in, the flashbulbs erupted. A small cluster of journalists had gathered near the security fence, tipped off by someone inside the terminal that a high-value passenger was being escorted through the technical side of the runway. One woman, microphone in hand, called out above the noise, "Ms. Carter, can we ask, what do you want to say to the crew of Flight 309? Another voice followed. "Do you think the punishment was enough?" Cameras focused. Lenses zoomed. Naomi paused, 1 foot inside the car, then turned slowly, not with drama, but with intention. Her gaze was steady, unreadable. She spoke just 1 sentence. "They taught me I don't belong," she said clearly, her voice carrying through the evening stillness. "I agree. I belong somewhere higher." Then she stepped inside, door closing behind her with a sound more final than any gavel. The footage aired before midnight. Clips of the alert on the plane's internal monitors had already leaked via employee screenshots. The statement from the Civil Aviation Authority confirming the audit engagement went viral within hours. But it wasn't until the financial press got wind of who Naomi Carter really was that the story detonated across industries. She wasn't just an oversight specialist. She was the primary signatory of the Halden Trust, a regulatory investment body with partial control over the CAA Watch Fund, an entity responsible for approving or withholding nearly $300 million in sector stabilization grants. And more importantly, she had sole discretionary power over a $75 million renewal allocation that had been under review for the same airline that operated Flight 309. In boardrooms across 3 cities, emails flew. Phone calls escalated. Legal departments scrambled to understand how a woman with no entourage, no name tag, no PR handlers, had dismantled the operational reputation of one of the top 3 domestic carriers with a phone and a fingerprint. Within a week, an internal report leaked to several high-level aviation consortiums. The title was blunt: Failure of Protocol and Bias Response Flight 309 Case Study. Inside, it detailed the timeline from Naomi's boarding to the moment the Tier Alpha alert triggered. Names were redacted, but not well enough. Within 10 days, the airline stock dipped 6%. Investors began pulling short-term commitments. The board of directors demanded an emergency risk mitigation strategy. But the real blow hadn't landed yet. Exactly 1 month later, at 6:41 a.m., a commuter passing through Terminal D of the same airport where Flight 309 had landed paused at the far end of the ticketing concourse. He recognized someone. It took him a moment to be sure, but then he saw the face. The smile was different now, forced, brittle, but unmistakable. Tessa Monroe stood behind the counter of a regional airline booth, wearing a basic agent uniform. No wings pinned to her blouse. No mic earpiece clipped behind her ear. She was handing out printed boarding passes and apologizing for bag weight fees. A laminated name tag hung from her neck, this time reading Trini Tessa M. She didn't look up when the man passed, but the shame clung to her posture like a shadow. She had gone from managing premium cabins to explaining gate changes at 6 a.m. The ethics tribunal had ruled, not criminal, but ethically unfit for supervisory duty. Suspension had become reassignment. She hadn't been fired, just demoted, publicly. Inside the airline's downtown office, the CFO of the company stared at a different screen, one showing the final denial memo from the Halden Trust. The funding had been pulled. The $75 million reauthorization had been declined. The memo was short, signed electronically by Naomi Carter. No comment, no explanation, just the official seal of closure. Request denied, non-compliance with class protection standards, case reference 309 Carter. The CFO ran a hand over his face, already knowing what this meant. They wouldn't just lose the grant. They'd lose the partnerships linked to it. Advertising deals, subsidy protections, even union negotiation leverage. And there was no appeal, Back in Naomi's office, high above the city in a tower with no signs, no logos, just a quiet suite labeled with an alphanumeric code, she sat reviewing quarterly impact reports. She didn't speak to the media. She didn't post online. Her face remained largely unknown. That was intentional. She hadn't done any of this for fame. She had done it because people like her weren't supposed to reach first class, let alone own the route. And now they didn't just know her name, they had to answer to it. If this story made you stop and think even for a second, don't forget to subscribe for more narratives that challenge power, expose hidden systems, and redefine what justice looks like. Which moment hit you the hardest? What part caught you off guard? And where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every one.